Hey guys, this is Andrew Sluder, pastor of Bible Baptist Church here in Asheville, North Carolina. It has been a minute since I did a video. I've been slammed the past 2 weeks. We had our meeting here, had some people from out of town come in, and I'm just now getting back. Had to do a suicide run to Delaware. Went straight there and straight back, all within one 24-hour stretch. So it has been a busy 2 weeks, but I'm glad to be back with you. We will be on the lookout for another Laodicean podcast, Laodicean Lookout podcast that'll be coming to you within the next couple of days. It will for sure be out before Thanksgiving. It'll be our Thanksgiving edition of the Laodicean Lookout, and you will not want to miss it, so be watching out for that. All right, if you can't already tell by the title of the video, I'm going to be doing or talking to you about why I practice foot washing. Now, foot washing is a issue that we have discussed a few times on the Backwoods Bible broadcast on Facebook. I've had some different people talk to me about it, but I really wanted to. I've never done a video on YouTube about it, kind of explaining why I practice foot washing. Now, foot washing is not something that we practice often, or that I practice often. It's not something we do as a formal service here at the church like we would the Lord's Supper or baptism. I'm a little hesitant to call it an ordinance, but I'm also not opposed to calling it an ordinance. We'll talk about that here in just a minute later on in the video. But I do practice foot washing. There have been a few times where I have washed somebody's feet. And I'm going to be honest with you, man. If you're in a service where there's foot washing going on, it is one of the most holy experiences. I mean, there is a different air that comes in the room. I like shouting. I like the still calmness. I like all that, but there is something different about foot washing that it's almost inexplicable. Now I'm going to show you from the Bible why I practice it. Now a lot of people say, well, that's something that people saw the Pope a couple of years ago washing those prisoners' feet. He went in there and washed their feet. Well, that's something Catholics do. Or they'll say, well, that's something the old Anabaptists did, or that's something they did in the days of Jesus. We don't do that anymore. We're not supposed to do that. We don't have to do that. Or there'll be some people say, well, I don't care. I'm just not washing. I'm not touching somebody's feet. And we're going to read from the text that's kind of the point. I'm not washing anybody's feet. Yeah, well, that's exactly the kind of attitude that Jesus was trying to get out of you. And the best way to get it out of you is to have you wash somebody's feet. Let's look what the text says. Let's dive right in. You ready? John chapter 13 and verse number 4. It says, He riseth from supper, and laid aside his garments, and took a towel, and girded himself. After that, he poureth water into a basin, and began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with the towel wherewith he was girded. And then we're going to skip verses 6 through about 12, because or verse 11, 6 through 11, that's where Peter says, you don't wash my feet, I'm going to wash yours. And Jesus says, if I don't wash you, have no part of me. And then Peter says, well, wash my hands and my head and all that. A beautiful picture there, and a great statement by the Apostle Peter. But notice in verse number 12, so after he had washed their feet, and had taken his garments, and was set down again, he said unto them, Know ye what I have done to you? So Jesus asked the disciples, do you know what I've just done to you? And here's the thing, why would Jesus be asking this? If the act of foot washing was just some act they did back then, or it doesn't have any importance now, or we shouldn't be doing, why would he ask them this? No doubt they had seen people wash their feet. No doubt they had seen the act of feet washing done. In fact, Jesus actually kind of chides the Simon the Pharisee when he's sitting in his house. The woman comes in and washes Jesus' feet with her tears, and he gets a little gypped about it. And Jesus says, "Hey, wait a second, you didn't do this for me. It was an expected thing. People were traveling on long journeys. They were wearing sandals. It's dusty over there. Washing somebody's feet was a sign of hospitality and all that kind of stuff." But now notice here, Jesus asked him, do you know what I've done to you? And I'm sure the disciples are kind of like, well, yeah, we've seen this done. This is no special occasion. Maybe the fact that Jesus was doing it was a bit of a shock to them. But the act itself was normal. But Jesus is trying to drive home a point. He said, Ye call me Master and Lord, And you say, well, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and Master, have washed your feet, ye also ought to wash one another's feet. So Jesus is saying, listen, you've seen people do this. And as far as we know in recorded Scripture, this is the first time that Jesus has ever done it, though. So Jesus saying, if you say I'm your Lord and Master, and if I'm doing this to you, then you ought to be doing this very thing to others. That's what he clearly says there. And notice verse 15. For I have given you an example that ye should do as I have done unto you. Everybody that wants to deny the practice of foot washing gets their knickers in a twist in verse number 15. Because we'll see, he says it's an example. Okay. Well, I agree it's an example. But the problem is he doesn't say, oh, just do things like feet washing. Just, I'm trying to teach you humility, but you don't actually have to do this, even though I said in verse 14, if I've done it, you do it too. I just want you to take the principle of it, but you don't ever have to wash anybody's feet. Just take the principle of it and go along with it and just serve others. And listen, that is the lesson that Jesus is trying to teach: humility and serving others. And notice Peter in 48 hours from now is going to be completely denying the Lord. He's going to be completely denying that he ever knows Jesus, less than 48 hours even. So the principle here is very clear. If I've washed your feet, you wash other people's feet. This is an example. Verse 15 in no way, shape, or form negates verse 14, the verse before. In no way negates it at all. Okay? Jesus said, if I've done this, you do it also. Now, the reason why that I'm hesitant to call it an ordinance is because I think sometimes we get a little dogmatic about what an ordinance is. Paul does clearly mention ordinances in 1 Corinthians 11. Of course, there are traditionally two ordinances in the Baptist church. There's baptism and the Lord's Supper. Now, I agree with both of those, all right? We practice baptism here, and we practice the Lord's Supper here. There are some guys, though, that are dogmatically against the foot washing being an ordinance of the church. And the reason why they say that is because it doesn't picture the death, burial, and resurrection. All right? I've heard that argument. Well, the problem is neither does the Lord's Supper. It pictures the death, but not the resurrection. All right, you're showing the Lord's death till he comes. I agree with that with the Lord's Supper, but it does not picture the resurrection in there at all. Baptism, of course, obviously does picture the death, burial, and resurrection. So the whole idea, well, it doesn't teach the gospel, I think that falls apart because the gospel is clearly in 1 Corinthians 15, verses 3 and 4, the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So what is an ordinance? Whatever your definition of an ordinance is, that's fine. But let me just give you where I'm at with foot washing. Is it an ordinance? I'm hesitant to call it that. I don't know if it's something that I would say, bless God, if your church isn't practicing this in a formal service, if you're not doing this and requiring this of your members, then you're wrong and they ought to be doing this. But I'm also not going to go so far as to say, I'm also not going to, sit here and say that you shouldn't. But, well, if you don't do this, it's okay. It's not a big deal, whatever your preference is. Because the reality of it is in the Gospels, we find the command to baptize, and we find the Pauline precedent for doing it. All right, Paul's our apostle. I fully am aware and agree with all that. Paul is our apostle. But we don't want to throw out, we don't want to be hyper-dispensationalists and throw out water baptism just because Paul never talks about it. Paul never talks about water baptism except when he says in 1 Corinthians 1 that he doesn't do it. All right? So I'm not going to throw out the baby with the bathwater, though. Well, Paul never talks about water baptism except the one place where he says he didn't do it, or didn't come to do it, I should say. He only baptized a few. So I don't want to be hyper there. But we do find Paul baptizing many times in the book of Acts. So there's gospel command and Pauline practice or precedent for it. The same way with the Lord's Supper. We find a gospel command, and then we find Paul practicing it, 1 Corinthians 11, or a Pauline precedent for it. And so this is why I'm hesitant to say that you shouldn't be doing it in a service. You shouldn't do this in a service, or it's okay if you don't do it in a service. I'm hesitant to say that because you find a gospel command for it. Folks, I don't care what anybody says. John 11:14 is as plain as the nose on your face. He said to do it. But you also do find Pauline precedent for it. In fact, if a widow, 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse number 10, if a widow wanted to be taken into the number, this is what she had to do, 1 Timothy 5:10. This was the quote-unquote qualifications. Well reported of for good works. If she have brought up children, if she have lodged strangers, if she have washed the saints' feet, if she have relieved the afflicted, if she have diligently followed every good work. Notice there in verse number 10, one of the requirements, qualifications of being a widow taken into the number is that you had to wash the saints' feet. So at some point in the early church, whether it was a service or whether it was something that was expected, whether it was widely practiced just in personal life, I don't know what exactly how it was implemented, okay? All I know is that when that woman turned 60 and her husband was dead, if she wanted to be considered as part of the number, she would have had to have been known to wash the saints' feet. So there was some kind of practice of it going on in the early church. This is not just simply talking about hospitality or being known as a servant. No, these are specific things. If she's lodged strangers, relieved the afflicted, brought up children. These are specific things. These aren't just ideas or examples of, what if she's done something similar to it. So folks, wherever you stand on, this is nothing I would fall out or argue about with anybody, but I'm going to tell you the few times that I have done foot washing in my life, it has been extremely, extremely humbling. It has been something that has helped me. There was, I don't even get into it. I don't even get into it because a servant doesn't brag about the things he's done. And this is and foot washing is the ultimate servitude to a man. Okay, it is just, there is something so humbling about you untying a man's shoes, or if you're a woman, taking off a woman's shoe, whatever, untying a man's shoelaces, taking off his shoes, taking off his socks, and washing his feet. All right, that is humbling, and it'll help you in your life, I promise you. And both times I've done it was in a service. It was in a service setting, and it's just, I have known preachers, I'll say this, I have known preachers who are having conflicts with church members, or are having conflicts with other preachers who have who went to that person and says, the Lord told me to wash your feet. And it has been resolved. It was resolved. They didn't talk about anything. They didn't try to have some kind of meeting, or it was boom, it was resolved right after that. Because not only does it humble the person that's doing it, but it's a humbly experiencing for the person that is having receiving it, having their feet washed. So anyway, folks, I know this has been a little scattered. This isn't one of those videos where I'm dogmatic about it, and I'm just saying, bless God, say it. But I do want to give you that idea in your head. It is commanded. I will say dogmatically that we are commanded to wash each other's feet. How often, how much, who to do it to? Is it just something you do like privately, just, when somebody comes into your house and you receive them, or it's something you do in a service setting? I don't know. That I think the scriptures are, unless somebody just really dug up some good stuff, I don't think the scriptures ever really are going to be clear about that. But we do find, just like baptism and the Lord's Supper, we find feet washing having a gospel command and being practiced in the Pauline epistles. All right? So if you're going to say that that's the reason why these two are ordinances, then you'll have to lump that in as well. If you're going to say that there's a different definition for ordinances, then, who knows what to do with this. All right? I'm just giving you what the Bible says and where I'm at personally with it in my life. And I wouldn't have a problem with somebody saying it's an ordinance, and also wouldn't have a problem with somebody saying it's, not an ordinance. But I do have a problem with, and this is where I'll wrap it up, I do have a problem with these people who absolutely ignore it and say, well, I'm not touching anybody's feet. I'm not washing anybody's feet. Because what that's revealing is it's not just the fact you think feet are disgusting. And it's not just the fact that I'm not doing, that's weird, that's taboo. It's probably revealing a much deeper issue. It's probably revealing a very severe pride and image issue in your own personal life, and that's why you're not going to do it. Anyway, folks, I hope you've enjoyed the video. God bless you is my prayer.